Donald Trump has been unambiguous that Venezuelan oil and the commercial opportunity it represents for American companies were a primary reason for the removal of President Maduro. And that's because Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on Earth.
What does your early intelligence say about the state of Venezuelan energy infrastructure?
Getting these oil companies to go back to Venezuela where it's still unstable, it may be indeed unsafe, and it could even be uneconomic. That is going to be a really big and really difficult job.
Let me tell you about the dumbest geopolitical move of this administration. And yes, I'm aware that's a high bar. The United States just seized control of Venezuela, captured Nicolas Maduro, promised the American people 300 billion barrels of oil, energy independence, cheap gas, a new era of prosperity. And guess what? Not a single major oil company wants to touch it. Not Exxon, not Chevron, not Shell, nobody. Meanwhile, while Washington was playing regime change theater in Caracas, Beijing quietly locked down 90% of the world's rare earth supply chain, restricted silver exports, and positioned itself as the only credible superpower that actually understands long-term strategy. This is the story of how Trump's administration just fumbled the resource war of the century. And why, by the time you finish watching this, you'll understand that China didn't just win this round, they've been winning for the last decade while we were busy tweeting about it. So here's what happened. The Trump administration, fresh into power, decides that Venezuela is low-hanging fruit. Maduro's isolated, the economy's in shambles, the military's demoralized, they move in. Special operations, CIA coordination. Within weeks, Maduro's in custody and Washington's holding the keys to the largest proven oil reserves on planet Earth. Trump goes on television, says this is the deal of the century. 300 billion barrels, more oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Canada, 10 times what China has underground. He promises American energy dominance. He promises prices at the pump will drop. He promises that big oil will flood into Venezuela, rebuild the infrastructure, and turn it into the Texas of South America. And for about 72 hours, the media ate it up. Trump delivers on energy independence. Historic geopolitical victory. America secures its energy future. Then reality kicked in. Because here's what nobody told the American people during those victory laps. Venezuela's oil infrastructure isn't just damaged, it's obliterated. Years of sanctions, many of which were American sanctions, by the way, turned the industry into a graveyard. The rigs don't function, the pipelines leak crude into the ground, the refineries are rusted-out husks that haven't operated at capacity in years. And the oil itself? It's garbage. I'm not being hyperbolic. Venezuelan crude is some of the heaviest, lowest quality oil in the world. It's thick like tar. It doesn't flow easily. You can't just pump it out and ship it to Houston. It requires specialized refineries, specialized equipment, specialized expertise. Saudi Arabia has light, sweet crude, the premium stuff. It flows like water and refines into jet fuel and high-grade gasoline. American shale oil is pretty decent. Russian crude is medium grade. Canada has heavy oil, but at least their infrastructure works. Venezuela, bottom of the barrel, literally. And the global market knows this. Even before sanctions, Venezuelan crude sold at a 20% discount because refiners know it's harder to work with. This isn't ideology. This is chemistry. So Trump promised oil companies they could waltz into Venezuela and start printing money. But here's the pitch they actually heard. Hey, want to spend $100 billion rebuilding an entire oil industry from scratch in a country with no functioning government, no legal protections, and active armed resistance groups in the jungle? Oh, and the oil you'll extract is low quality and requires specialized refineries that don't exist yet. Sound good? Estimates put the reconstruction cost at $10 billion per year for a decade. But that's optimistic. The real number? Probably triple that. We're talking about $200 to $300 billion in upfront investment just to get the oil flowing. And then you have the security problem. Imagine you're an engineer. You're trying to repair a drilling rig in rural Venezuela. On Monday, there's an explosion 5 miles away, some militia group you've never heard of. Tuesday, protesters block the roads. Wednesday, your security convoy gets ambushed. Friday, half your crew refuses to come back. How do you operate in that environment? How do you convince shareholders that this is a sound investment? You can't. And that's why Exxon's CEO told Trump point blank that Venezuela is uninvestable. Let's talk about that moment, because it's more important than it seems. Darren Woods, Exxon's CEO, had a direct conversation with the Trump administration, and he laid out 3 requirements before Exxon would even consider going into Venezuela. 1. Legal protections. Translation: guarantee that the Venezuelan government, or whatever comes after, won't nationalize our assets again, because they've done it twice before. 2. Commercial frameworks. Translation: subsidies, price floors, government guarantees that we won't lose money even if oil prices crash. 3. Durable investment protections. Translation: U.S. military boots on the ground defending oil fields indefinitely. And here's the kicker. Even with all that, Wood said it still might not be worth it. This is Exxon, the biggest, most aggressive oil company in history, the corporation that has toppled governments, bribed officials, and drilled in war zones for profit. And they're saying no. That should tell you everything. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the Trump administration just lifted sanctions on Venezuelan oil, the same sanctions they spent years defending as necessary to promote democracy and human rights. Remember that? We have to punish the Maduro regime for its authoritarianism. Well, now that Washington controls the oil, those sanctions are gone. Funny how that works. Turns out sanctions were never about human rights. They were always about leverage, a geopolitical tool to force outcomes. And when the tool stops serving American interests, you drop it. The oil will flow now, but only if Washington controls it. Only if American companies benefit. And the rest of the world sees this for exactly what it is: naked resource imperialism dressed up in democratic rhetoric. Meanwhile, guess who's been playing this game smarter? China. While Trump was planning regime change in Venezuela, China was doing something far more effective. They were locking down supply chains, not through military invasions, not through coups, through economics, through patient long-term investment in the resources that actually matter: rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, nickel, silver. These aren't just commodities. They're the backbone of modern technology. Electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, smartphones, F-35 fighter jets, guided missile systems. Everything that defines 21st century economic and military power requires these materials. And China controls 90% of the refined supply. Not because they have 90% of the reserves. They don't. Because they spent decades investing in refining capacity while America was busy invading Iraq and Afghanistan for oil we didn't even need. Beijing looked at the future and said, oil is the past. Rare earths are the future. And they were right. Here's how bad it is. There are 5 critical minerals that China dominates completely: samarium, neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, europium. If Beijing cut off exports of just those 5 tomorrow, the immediate damage to the U.S. economy would be $10 billion. But that's just the direct impact. Supply chains freeze, production stops, defense contractors can't build weapons, tech companies can't manufacture devices. The indirect cost? Hundreds of billions, maybe trillions over time. And this isn't hypothetical. China's already done it. They restricted rare earth exports to Japan during a territorial dispute. Japan's tech sector nearly collapsed. They backed down immediately. Now imagine that leverage applied to the United States. Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, just announced a plan to break China's rare earth dominance. His solution? American innovation and agreements with 8 allied nations. Let me translate that. We have no plan. American innovation is a talking point, not a strategy. And good luck convincing 8 countries to spend hundreds of billions building a supply chain from scratch when they can just buy from China for cheaper. And then, recently, Beijing made another move that nobody in Washington seems to understand. China restricted silver exports. They announced a whitelist of just 44 approved companies that can export silver. Everyone else? Cut off. Now, you might think, silver? Who cares about silver? You should. Because silver isn't just a precious metal anymore. It's a strategic resource. Every solar panel requires silver. Electric vehicle batteries use it. Electronics, semiconductors, medical equipment, industrial machinery. Silver is everywhere in modern manufacturing, and China just took control of global supply. Why? Because they know what Trump doesn't. The trade war is escalating. If Washington cuts off Venezuelan oil to China, or if Navarro's rare earth strategy somehow succeeds, Beijing has a kill switch. They'll weaponize silver. Prices explode. Western manufacturing grinds to a halt. And here's the beautiful part. China's already stockpiling physical silver. They've been doing it for years. While Wall Street was manipulating futures markets to suppress prices and keep retail investors out, China was buying actual metal. The paper-to-physical ratio in silver is probably over 100 to 1, meaning for every ounce of real silver, there are 100 paper contracts. It's a Ponzi scheme. And when it breaks, and it will break, China's holding the real assets. So let's talk about the difference between American strategy and Chinese strategy. America's approach: invade a country, seize resources, promise corporations safety and profits. Hope they take the deal. When they don't, lift sanctions and try to salvage the political disaster. It's short-term, reactive, driven by electoral cycles and cable news headlines. China's approach: invest in refining capacity, build supply chains over decades, lock down resources through economic partnerships, not military occupation. Position yourself as the indispensable node in global trade. It's long-term, strategic, boring as hell, and it's winning. Beijing didn't need to invade anyone to control rare earths. They just built better refineries than everyone else and undercut competitors on price until the West shut down their own capacity. Now, decades later, if you want rare earth elements, you buy from China or you don't get them. Simple. That's power. Real, durable 21st century power. And here's the part that should terrify every American taxpayer. If the US actually tries to compete with China on supply chains, it's going to require spending on a scale we've never seen. We're talking trillions of dollars to build rare earth refining capacity, to subsidize mining operations, to guarantee prices for commodities that might not be profitable. Where does that money come from? Debt. The Treasury will issue bonds, the Fed will print money, and inflation, already at uncomfortable levels, will get worse. Meanwhile, China's sitting on $3 trillion in foreign reserves. They're not printing money to compete. They've already won. They're just managing their advantage. The bond markets are going to break under this pressure. The G7 is trying to rebuild entire industries that China spent decades perfecting. You can't speed-run industrial capacity. You can't innovate your way out of not having refineries. And every dollar spent trying is a dollar that could have been spent on infrastructure, healthcare, education, or paying down the massive national debt. So let's come back to Venezuela. The US overthrew a government, captured a head of state, made grand promises about energy independence, and now, months later, not a single barrel of that oil is flowing to America. Because the oil companies won't go in. The costs are too high, the risks are too great, and the quality of the oil doesn't justify the investment. This is a geopolitical humiliation disguised as a victory, and it gets worse, because now Washington has to figure out what to do with Venezuela. You can't just leave. You've already overthrown the government. There's no going back. So now, American taxpayers are funding a military occupation of a country we can't extract resources from, while China quietly signs trade deals with Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia for the lithium and copper we'll need for the energy transition. Trump wanted to be the president who secured American energy dominance. Instead, he might go down as the president who proved America no longer understands how power works in the modern world. Here's what's really happening, and I need you to understand this. The United States and China are decoupling, not because of ideology, not because of democracy versus authoritarianism, because two superpowers can't coexist in the same economic system when they both want to be dominant.